Howdy, folks, and welcome to Moose Podcast 209. I trust you're doing well. Had a great week. Folks were kind of quiet when it came to questions. So remember, you can always click on the link there on the blog page. Ask me questions. I'm here to help any way that I can. One common question that came in this past week: what's the fall color like up in Maine? Well, when we got here 2 weeks ago, it was mostly green. We're about ready to leave. It's all blown away. So there's your fall forecast for Maine. Came and went. But I want to thank you for sending in those questions and for listening to the Moose Podcast. Also want to thank my good friends at Bedford's Camera. It's bedfords.com. They've got a lot of things going on, and this month they have their PhotoCon. And even though it might be a virtual PhotoCon, like so many events have had to turn to this year, theirs is really quite unique in the fact they have all their normal classes that we're going to have a PhotoCon virtually, as well as a lot of other ones. I'm in the other category. So I recorded a 1-hour class that's there for you to go and watch. So check out Bedford's PhotoCon there on their website, bedfords.com. Speaking of checkout, make sure you use that special MOOSE code to get that discount. For most states, no sales tax, and anything over $99, free shipping. They've got a lot of great stuff there, including the new Z lenses. So make sure you check out Bedford's Camera and remember to thank them for sponsoring the Moose Podcast. Well, let's get right to this week's topic, clickbait. Now a good friend, a really good friend, he's really worldly, and he keeps up on these new terms and new phrases, things going on, especially in some of the social media where I don't do so well. There's only so many hours in a day, and people are always surprised I don't watch sports. I just don't have that time to sit there and do that. I did a lot when I was younger, but not now. But anyway, he was going through and we were talking about some things that we were seeing pop up. He said, "Oh, that's just clickbait." And I said, "What? What is clickbait?" And he said, "Well, clickbait is when people put up a title for an online article, and the title makes you want to click and read the article, which has no substance. It just had a really great title, and that was the clickbait." And I sat there and thought about that, and I know I've done it a few times to, you say something like a blog post like "the naked truth," and all of a sudden your hits for that day go way up because the word naked, well, it makes it to those kind of pornography kind of channels, and people go, "Oh," and they want to come look, and then they go, "Oh, it's photography." But anyway, so that's a real quick example of clickbait. Well, what has that got to do with photography? Well, it got me thinking, especially the last couple of weeks that we're out here shooting and watching. And, well, photographers, by their nature, a lot of them go for clickbait. So we're out at Portland Headlight. It's a really beautiful location, a real beautiful lighthouse. And we're doing long exposures. And we're there this morning. And we had a cloud cover that went all over, except for perhaps this little 1/4-inch sliver way out on the eastern seaboard, way out there, where the sun was going to come up. Now, I'm sitting there looking at the scene, and I know the sun is going to peek out, I don't know, for maybe 10 minutes. And then it was going to go behind the clouds, and then would peek in and out of the clouds as the clouds were permit. So we're there, and there's 5 of us looking at this gorgeous scene, and we're doing our shooting. And then there's a ton of photographers, a lot, in fact, a lot more than I thought. And I say a ton, there's probably at least 30 photographers coming out there. It's a real popular spot. If you've never been to Portland, Maine, you have to go to Portland Headlight. Anyway, so we're got our cameras and we're doing long exposures, and I mean long exposure, 8 to 13 minutes of the lighthouse as the sun's slowly, coming up. And these people come up and they kind of look at the lighthouse, and I'm watching them, but they kept on going and wasn't really paying attention other than the fact that they weren't around us. And when I look next time, they're all off to our right, and they got their cameras all pointed to the horizon. Now, you got to remember that I come from where photography is about light, and it's about telling a story. And in this case, a lot of the story is the romance that is a lighthouse, the romance that is being on a craggy, rocky, wave crash coastline. And when you've got these really kind of moody clouds that the light is bouncing in and out of, you've got the light, you got the story, you got this great building. So then it's just putting in your own little personal touches to finish it your way as a storyteller, and it's really kind of an easy shot. And I'm looking at these folks, and then all of a sudden, I've got it timed, and being me, I'm looking at my apps, I'm figuring out when the light's going to actually strike the lighthouse. I just want a little bit of kiss of sunlight. The rest of the time, I wanted it, just kind of in the clouds, and I'm watching the whole scenario. So I've got my 13-minute exposure going, so the last minute, the sun will actually be hitting. So I'm watching my ND timer, and I'm looking at these people, and the sun comes up, and where their cameras all pointed? Right towards the sun. There's just a handful, there's our group and maybe 2 or 3 other people who are looking at the lighthouse. Everybody else is looking at the sun. And my head goes clickbait, and my camera shuts. Now I'll take a few more pictures, then it's time for breakfast. Well, what's the point? Well, photographers, they are a lot like a moth to a flame. They see that bright and shiny, squirrel kind of thing, or that bright flame, and then they get fixed on it and they take pictures. That bright stuff is the clickbait. Photographers tend to not actually think through everything that's in that and around them in that viewfinder, and include the elements that tell the story, exclude the elements that take the eye away from that story, and make the photograph happen. I saw it many times, and it got me to wondering what's going on. Well, it's this clickbait mentality, I think, that is prevalent right now, especially with the pandemic and people spending so much time online, that doom scrolling, as they call it. And they're looking at that title, but not the story behind it. They're looking for that, they see that bright thing, the sun, or that quick, simple thing, and they go click and they move on. They aren't taking the time to actually bring their story to fruition in their photograph. Let me give you another example. We're at another lighthouse called Pemaquid, a very classic one that Jay Mansell made, really everybody familiar with this, with a photograph he took back in the 70s. And so we're out of this marvelous spot, and it's a real windy day. And we're talking about really windy. And the flag is just standing straight out. It's waving, but it never moves. It's just straight out. So there's one little spot you can go and shoot, and you get the beautiful rocks that lead you up to Pemaquid, which is really the classic shot of this lighthouse. And there's this one spot where you can, between the tower of the lighthouse and the lightkeeper's house, you can see the flag. It's a really small little window. And, you have to kind of jostle along these rocks so you're at the right elevation to see the whole flag. You have to move right and left so you get the whole flag in this gap. But you can get the whole flag. And it is a very small detail. But I was watching photographers, and they weren't looking at that detail. Again, the clickbait got their attention. And rather than saying, okay, there's the subject, which is what you've got to start with, right? You got to say, what's the subject? And say, okay, there's the light, and this is how I want to expose for the light to tell the emotion of the moment. and then including elements that help tell a story, take your mind to the subject and around through the frame and back to the subject, and exclude those elements that don't do that. They just want clickbait. So I guess the point of the podcast is, as visual storytellers, there's more to that click than just saying, what's the subject? There's more than saying, what are the settings? What f-stop and shutter speed should I use? There's more to it than figuring out the white balance and the lens that needs to be used and the filter that needs to be used. There is 100% a lot more that you have to put into that photograph. That's you. You're the one telling the story. You're the one who, got up at 3:45 in the morning and drove that distance and walked out in the dark on the rocks and sat there and put the tripod up, took the time to wait for the earth to turn, the sun to do its magic. And after all that, you still have to put in yourself into that storytelling. When you're doing that long exposure and you're sitting there and you've got, it's not for a quick synopsis. You put your camera down, you sit there and you frame up the elements the way you want them in the viewfinder. You take your base exposure, so you figure out your f-stop, exposure compensation when you're in aperture priority. You look at that shutter speed. Got to remember that shutter speed. That's a challenge. Then you screw on that 10x filter or your 10 and your 6x, and then you look at ND timer. You look at how long you need to be. You put the camera to manual mode so it makes sure it's in time. Hit that button, hit the button on the phone, and then you wait 13 minutes, 18 minutes, 24 minutes, whatever it is, and you just stand there waiting to take that shot. In that time, you need to think about, well, one, why am I using a ND filter in the first place? Well, there's got to be some movement in the frame that's going to blur during that long exposure that's going to help you tell that story. I mean, that's in a lighthouse, if you have no movement, bald skies, tides not coming or going, water still, why go through all that pain if you have no movement to communicate with that ND filter? So, the clickbait, you sit there and go, oh, I got all these tools. I got up early. I got to take that shot. Doesn't work for you. That doesn't bring out that story. And you could apply this to almost all sorts of things. Aviation photography. If your angle is so that you don't see that prop rotating because you're totally broadside, you don't need to go through the pain of a very slow shutter speed because there's no prop to blur. If you're out shooting critters, okay, and you've got totally gray skies and you've got totally gray water and you're photographing birds on that water, I mean, even though the bird is there, it's all gray. It's a real, the gray day syndrome. I'm feeling a gray. That it's not worth the picture. You've got to sit there, and just because you can do it, just because you're there, doesn't mean there is a photograph. There's just clickbait. There's just that quick thing that, you can take that picture and then I'm telling you, within a week, month, you look at that picture and go, why'd I take it? That's clickbait. It's something that, I never thought of. It had a title, this thing where we feel like we put in our time and we have to take that picture. But my worldly friend, taught me a new phrase, that word clickbait, where you've got a great title and no substance. And that can happen with our photography. So if you think about it, and if it's in your consciousness, you might sit there and, rather than take the picture, just enjoy the scene, because there's absolutely nothing wrong with just enjoying life in front of you and not necessarily taking a photograph. That photograph is just like the icing on the cake. So remember, when you frame up those elements and you've done all that work and you thought about the exposure, to put in that last little important ingredient in that photograph, that storytelling, and that's you. And you'll avoid the clickbait. Hey, the fall is rushing by. We're coming towards winter. There's lots of stuff on that website of mine. People have been asking about gloves. I will do my annual glove report coming up in a while. Out there looking at them. So you guys stay warm and remember to make every click your story.